The rain fell in thin, silver sheets, blurring the bright lights of Seoul. Joan's wipers dragged back and forth with a steady rhythm as she drove through the busy streets. It was close to midnight, and most passengers she picked up at that hour were either drunk, tired, or lost in their thoughts. She didn't mind. She loved her job. The quiet hum of the city soothed her, and every face that sat behind her had a story. She had just dropped off a couple at Gangnam Station when her phone buzzed with another request. A ride from Itaewon to an exclusive area she had never entered before. The location was marked with a private symbol, usually meaning one thing: rich people. She sighed, fixed her small round mirror, and whispered, "All right, one more ride, then home." When she pulled up, she saw him immediately, tall, dark-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit despite the rain. His expression was unreadable. Beside him stood a little boy, maybe 7, holding a small umbrella too big for his tiny hands. The man opened the door without a word. The boy followed, his head lowered, clutching a stuffed penguin. The air changed instantly. Joan could feel the coldness from the back seat. Not just from the rain, but from their silence. "Good evening, sir," she greeted cheerfully, glancing through the rearview mirror. "Where to?" He replied curtly, "Hanamdong." "Don't talk." That tone, sharp, commanding. She'd met arrogant passengers before, but something about his voice sent a small shiver through her. Still, she shrugged and began to drive. The car was silent except for the soft rain and the hum of the engine. A few minutes into the ride, a small sound broke the stillness, a quiet sniffle. Joan looked through the mirror and saw the little boy wiping his tears. The man beside him stared out the window, ignoring him completely. "Appa?" the boy whispered in a trembling voice. "I'm hungry." "We'll eat later," the man replied coldly, not even turning his head. "But I'm hungry now." "Stop crying. Be a man." His voice turned harsh, echoing through the small car. Joan froze. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. Be a man? To a child barely out of kindergarten? The boy's sobs grew louder, the kind that broke something inside a person. She could see his little body shaking as he cried harder. "Appa, please." "Enough!" the man snapped, voice sharp as a blade. "Stop making noise." Joan's heart clenched. She didn't understand how someone could talk like that to a baby. She slowed the car, torn between fear and anger. Every motherly instinct inside her was screaming. "Sir," she said softly, "maybe the boy." "I said don't talk." He cut her off, eyes cold in the mirror. "Drive." Something in her snapped. Joan slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, the car halting by the roadside. Rain splashed on the windshield. The man's sharp glare met hers in the mirror. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. She didn't answer. She turned in her seat to face the little boy, whose face was red and wet with tears. He looked so small, so lost. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice soft as rain. "It's okay. You're safe." The boy looked up at her, blinking. Then, without warning, he climbed forward and threw himself into her arms. "Mummy," he sobbed against her shoulder. "Mummy." Joan froze, her heart twisting painfully. The man's expression changed, confusion, then shock, then anger. But she ignored him. She held the child close, rubbing his back, whispering softly, "Shoo, I'm here. Don't cry, okay? You're a good boy. What's your name?" He sniffled. "Minjun." "Minjun, huh? That's a strong name. But even strong boys need food, right?" She smiled gently. The little boy nodded, still clinging to her. His small stomach grumbled. Joan looked up at the man. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white, but his eyes. There was something else behind that anger. Pain. "Sir," she said firmly. "He's hungry. That's why he's crying. Let's stop somewhere." He glared at her. "Do you know who you're talking to?" "I don't care who you are," she shot back, surprising even herself. "He's a child, not your soldier. Feed him." Silence filled the car. Even the rain seemed to pause. The Mafia boss, though she didn't know that yet, stared at her, completely taken aback. No one ever talked to him like that. A faint tremor appeared in his hand as he adjusted his cufflinks. "I'll feed him after my meeting," he muttered. "No," she said firmly. You'll feed him now. He looked ready to explode, but then his son's small voice cut through the tension. Appa, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. Please don't be mad. The man's eyes softened for a second. Joan noticed immediately. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but words failed him. Joan reached into her glove compartment, pulled out a chocolate bar she'd saved for herself, and unwrapped it. Here, Minjun. Just a bite. Okay? The boy's face brightened as he took it. Thank you, Mummy. Her chest tightened. The word hit differently. She smiled and brushed his hair gently. From the mirror, she caught the man watching. His expression unreadable, his dark eyes flickering with something she couldn't name. Next time, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. Listen to him. Children don't cry for no reason. For the first time, he didn't respond. He just sat there, silent, almost humbled. When they finally reached Hanamdong, the grand gates of his mansion opened automatically. Guards in black suits bowed deeply as they saw the car. Joan's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary passenger. The man stepped out first, fixing his coat. He looked at her through the open window. You shouldn't have interfered, he said lowly. She met his gaze, fearless. You shouldn't have let your son cry. He held her eyes for a moment, then turned to the boy. Minjun, let's go. The child hesitated. Can Mummy come too? Joan's heart fluttered painfully again. The man froze, then forced a faint smile. She's not Mummy, son. But Minjun only held her hand tighter. She's kind like Mummy. Something in the man's expression cracked. A flicker of grief that slipped through his hard exterior. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up his son, gave Joan one last long look, and walked away into the mansion. Joan sat there for a while, her heart still pounding, her mind spinning. Who was that man? And why did his sadness feel heavier than his anger? She didn't know it yet, but that night had changed everything. The Mafia boss who trusted no one had just met the one woman who would shatter his silence. And the little boy who'd found warmth in her arms wasn't going to forget her face. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside Joan's heart, something new began to bloom. A dangerous, tender story that neither of them could stop. The next morning, Joan woke up to the faint buzz of her alarm and the soft drizzle outside her tiny apartment window. Her back ached from long hours of driving, but her mind was still stuck on the strange man and his son from last night. She had driven hundreds of passengers in Seoul, yet none had stayed in her mind like that little boy calling her Mummy. As she made tea, she replayed the scene again and again. His soft sobs, her hand brushing through his hair, the cold stare of the man in the back seat, and those mansion gates that looked like something out of a movie. She wondered who he was. Some chaebol? Politician? Or worse, someone dangerous? But deep down, she didn't regret what she did. A hungry child is everyone's business, she murmured, sipping her tea. By noon, she was back on the road, her small yellow taxi weaving through traffic. Seoul was always busy, a city that never paused, not even to breathe. As she hummed along to her favorite Swahili song playing lowly on the radio, her phone vibrated with a new ride request. She glanced at the screen, same pickup location as last night. Itaewon. Her heart skipped. Coincidence? She hesitated, then accepted the ride. When she pulled up at the spot, her heart almost stopped. Standing there in the rain again under a black umbrella was the same man. This time, no child beside him. Just two men in dark suits standing behind him like shadows. She swallowed hard as he opened the back door and got in without a word. Where to, sir? She asked carefully. Gangnam. And this time, drive without drama, he said coldly. Her lips twitched, fighting a smile. Noted, boss. He didn't reply. His phone rang and his voice switched languages, Korean, English, then something else she didn't recognize. His tone was low and commanding, the kind that carried power even in whispers. Joan tried not to listen, but his words were sharp. Tell them I said no blood near the docks. Clean it. No mistakes. She froze. No blood? Clean it? Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. Who is this man? Her instincts screamed to drop him off and drive away, but curiosity rooted her there. She glanced through the mirror. His face was calm, unreadable, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. When he hung up, he caught her watching him. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Sorry. You talk like a man with a lot on his plate," she said lightly. His lips twitched faintly. Not quite a smile, not quite anger. "You talk too much for a driver. And you're too cold for a father," she shot back before she could stop herself. The silence that followed could have cut glass. One of his guards looked ready to pull a gun. Joan's heart raced, but she didn't look away. Finally, the man sighed. "You have courage. That's rare." "Or stupidity," she said softly. He looked out the window. "Maybe both." They drove in silence again, tension thick in the air. When she reached Gangnam, he finally spoke. "How much?" She glanced at the meter. 35,001. He reached into his coat and handed her a thick envelope instead. "For your silence." She frowned. "Silence. You saw things you shouldn't. Heard things you shouldn't. Take it and forget yesterday." She looked at the envelope, then at him. "I'm not interested in your money. I just drive taxis." He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if she was some puzzle he couldn't solve. "Most people would take it." "Well, I'm not most people." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached for the door handle, paused, and added quietly, "I'm Han Junisio." The name sent a small chill down her spine. She had heard it before, whispered among taxi drivers at night. The man who ran Seoul's underground world. The one whose enemies vanished. The one people called the Silent King. Before she could react, he got out, his guards following closely behind him. The street cameras flashed as he entered a tall glass building. Joan sat there, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her heart thundering. She had just argued with the most feared man in Korea, twice. She exhaled shakily and whispered, "Lord, what have I gotten myself into?" That evening, as she was closing her taxi app, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Miss Joan Mwikali?" "Yes, who's speaking?" "This is Mr. Han's assistant. You're requested to come to Hanamdong tomorrow morning. A private job offer." Her mouth went dry. "Mr. Han?" "Yes, 10 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." The line cut. Joan stood there in disbelief. Of all people, why him? She barely slept that night. Her mind wrestled with questions. Was he angry? Was it a trap? Or something else entirely? The next morning, she dressed carefully. Jeans, a neat black jacket, and her lucky scarf. She arrived at the mansion gate exactly at 10. Two guards in suits approached her car. "Joan Mwikali?" "Yes. Mr. Han is expecting you." The gates opened, revealing a grand driveway lined with cherry trees and black luxury cars. The air smelled of rain and roses. She parked near the entrance, her hands trembling. When she entered the massive living room, she froze. Minjun was sitting on the couch, playing with his stuffed penguin. The moment he saw her, his little face lit up. "Mummy!" he shouted and ran straight into her arms. Her eyes filled with warmth as she hugged him tightly. "Hey, little man, did you miss me?" He nodded eagerly. "Appa said you're coming. You'll stay with us?" She looked up and there he was. Han Junisio stood at the balcony above them, in a black turtleneck, looking down silently. He descended the stairs slowly, every movement controlled. "He hasn't stopped talking about you," he said quietly. Joan smiled, brushing Minjun's hair. "He's a sweet boy. He just needs love." Han Junesio's eyes darkened slightly. "Love doesn't protect him from bullets." "Neither does loneliness," she replied softly. He studied her for a long moment, then finally said, "Be my driver." She blinked. "Excuse me? You'll drive for me and Minjun. Permanently. You'll be paid well. You'll live here. You'll follow my rules." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "Why me?" "Because you stopped the car," he said simply. "No one's ever done that." Joan looked at Minjun's hopeful eyes, then back at his father. She could feel the weight of that choice pressing on her chest. Working for a mafia boss wasn't just dangerous, it was madness. But something in her heart whispered that fate had already made the choice for her. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but I have one rule too." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is? I don't drive for cruelty. If I see you hurt your son again, I'll walk away." His expression froze for a second. Then, to her surprise, he smiled faintly. The first real smile she had seen on him. "Understood," he said. "Welcome to my world, Miss Joan." As the clock ticked softly in that grand, silent mansion, Joan realized her life was no longer ordinary. She had stepped into the shadows of Seoul, where power, secrets, and danger lived side by side. But somewhere in that darkness, a small boy had found a mother, and a cold-hearted man was about to learn what warmth truly meant. The next morning, Joan stood before the mirror in her new room inside the mansion, still trying to convince herself that this was real. A week ago, she'd been a regular taxi driver fighting sleep at traffic lights. Now, she lived inside a billionaire's fortress surrounded by guards who never smiled and cameras that blinked red even at night. Her room was spacious, cream walls, a king-sized bed, white curtains swaying softly from the air conditioner's hum. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel like home. Everything was too clean, too still, like the house itself was afraid to breathe. She dressed in a simple black shirt, jeans, and sneakers, tying her braids neatly behind her head. A uniform wasn't required, but she had already learned one thing about Han Juneseo's world. Simplicity was safety. When she stepped out, a woman in her 40s wearing a maid's uniform bowed slightly. "Miss Joan, Mr. Han requests you in the dining hall." "Thank you," Joan said softly, following her through the long hallway. The dining room was enormous, lit by a crystal chandelier that sparkled against the morning light. The table could seat 20, yet only 3 plates were set. One for her, one for Minjun, and one at the head where the boss sat, unreadable as always. Joan hesitated at the door. He looked up. "Sit," he said simply. She obeyed, taking the seat beside Minjun, who grinned widely, his penguin toy tucked under his arm. "Good morning, Mummy." "Good morning, sunshine," she whispered with a smile. Han Juneseo cleared his throat softly. "He knows your name. Use it." Joan glanced at him. "He can call me what he wants. It makes him happy." For a moment, their eyes met. His dark and cold, hers warm and fearless. He looked away first. The breakfast was quiet, except for the clinking of cutlery. The little boy hummed softly as he ate pancakes, his feet swinging. Joan noticed the faint scars on his father's hand as he sliced his toast, long, thin lines, too, precise to be accidents. She realized then that even in peace, this man carried violence like a shadow. When they finished eating, he set down his glass and spoke firmly, his tone carrying authority that filled the entire room. "There are rules here, Miss Joan. You'll follow them if you want to stay." "I'm listening," she said, folding her hands on the table. "First," he began, "you drive only for me and my son. No other clients, no outside jobs. Your car is now under my company's security detail. You go nowhere untracked." Joan nodded. "Understood." "Second," he continued, "you will not enter the East Wing, ever. It's private." She raised a brow slightly. "Private as in?" "Private as in none of your business." He cut her off coldly. She exhaled softly and nodded again. "All right." "Third," his voice lowered, "if anything unusual happens, anyone approaches you, asks questions about me or my son, you report it immediately. You don't handle it on your own. My world is dangerous, Miss Joan. People smile with knives." The silence that followed was heavy. Even Minjun stopped eating and looked at his father curiously. Joan met his gaze evenly. "I understand, Mr. Han, but I don't scare easily." He studied her face for a long moment, as though searching for fear. He found none. "Good," he said finally, "because you'll need that." Then he stood, adjusted his coat, and motioned to the guards waiting near the door. "The car in the west garage is yours. My assistant will brief you. I have a meeting at 11, you drive." He left without another word, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. The boy turned to her immediately, his eyes lighting up. "Can we go to the park after Appa's meeting?" Joan smiled and brushed his hair. "If your Appa agrees, I don't see why not." The child nodded happily. "He always agrees when I ask nicely." Joan looked at him with gentle amusement. "Then we'll practice your asking nicely face." He giggled, and that laughter filled the space his father's coldness had left behind. The morning ride was quiet but heavy with unspoken tension. Han Junisio sat in the back, scrolling through his phone. Joan focused on the road, glancing occasionally through the rearview mirror. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was sharp, alive, like the air before a storm. "Your driving is smooth," he said suddenly, his voice calm. She smiled faintly. "Years of dodging soul traffic teaches you things." He hummed, almost impressed. "You seem fearless." "I just don't see the point of fear," she said simply. "It doesn't stop the rain, and it doesn't fix a flat tire." For the first time, he chuckled quietly, a sound so low she almost missed it. She turned slightly, catching his reflection in the mirror. He was still the same cold man, but that brief crack in his armor felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When they arrived at his meeting place, a tall glass building guarded by men in suits, she parked carefully. He opened the door but paused before stepping out. "You'll stay with Minjun in the car. Don't open the doors for anyone. Understand?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once and disappeared into the building, surrounded by his men. Joan looked at Minjun, who was munching quietly on some biscuits in the back seat. "Mummy," he said softly, "why does Appa never smile?" Her heart ached at the question. "Maybe he forgot how to," she said. "But you can help him remember." "How?" "By being his reason." The boy blinked, then smiled brightly. "I can do that," she grinned. "That's my little man." An hour later, when the boss returned, something in his mood had shifted. He looked tense, his jaw tight. His phone rang non-stop, and each call seemed to make his expression darker. At one point, he barked an order in Korean so sharp that even Minjun flinched. Joan didn't understand every word, but the tone was clear. Danger. As she drove back toward the mansion, he suddenly said, "Turn right. Take the longer route." She obeyed without question. 2 black sedans were following at a distance. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer, just kept watching the side mirror. "You see them?" "Yes," she replied. "Keep driving. Don't look again." Joan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The rain started again, light at first, then heavier, masking the tension in the car. When they reached a narrow tunnel, one of the black cars accelerated, trying to overtake. Joan didn't panic. She shifted gears and pressed the accelerator, the taxi roaring forward with a speed no one expected. "Hold on," she warned. The car swerved sharply, sliding through a tight turn, and the tailing vehicles fell back. Han Junesio's voice was calm but edged with surprise. "You drive like a ghost." "I told you," she said breathlessly. "Soul traffic teaches you things." He smirked slightly, the kind of smirk that said he hadn't been impressed in years. By the time they reached the mansion safely, Minjun was half asleep in his seat. Joan parked quietly, turning to look at the boy's peaceful face. "He's strong," she whispered. Han Junesio nodded. "He doesn't have a choice." Joan turned to him, her tone soft but firm. "He's a child, not a soldier. Give him choices, not commands." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on his son, the coldness in his face fading for just a second. "You speak like someone who's lost something too." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why I can see what you're losing now." The air between them thickened, not with anger, but with something deeper, unnamed. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain fell harder outside, beating softly on the windows. Then, quietly, he said, "Dinner will be served at 7. You'll join us." And without waiting for her reply, he stepped out, carrying his son gently in his arms. Joan watched them disappear into the house, the ruthless Mafia boss holding his sleeping child like something fragile. It was in that small moment that she saw the man behind the mask. Not a monster, not a king, just a father who didn't know how to love softly anymore. And as she sat in the car, heart still racing, she realized that this house had many rules, but she had already broken the most dangerous one. She had started to care. Rain pounded the city that night like a drum of warning, the kind of rain that silences even the busiest streets of Seoul. Inside the mansion, Joan sat in the small guest room she'd been given. Not too fancy, but clean, with a neat futon and a window overlooking the courtyard. She had changed into one of the plain sleep shirts provided by the house staff and was folding her clothes when a faint sound caught her attention. A soft, broken whimper came again. A child's sob, small, muffled, trembling. Joan froze. Then she moved quietly toward the sound. It was coming from down the hall, Minjun's room. She hesitated at his door, remembering the rules the head housekeeper, Mrs. Kong, had told her that morning. Never enter the child's room at night. The boss prefers silence after 8 p.m., but that cry wasn't something she could ignore. It wasn't the sound of a spoiled boy, it was pain. Without another thought, Joan pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a night lamp shaped like a moon. Minjun sat on his bed, knees pulled to his chest, tears streaking his cheeks. His penguin doll lay on the floor, wet from his tears. "Hey, baby," Joan whispered gently. "What's wrong?" The moment she spoke, he ran into her arms. "Mummy, Mummy, I dreamt again." She hugged him tightly, her heart melting. "It's okay. It's just a dream. You're safe now." "She was calling me," he sobbed. "Appa said not to talk about her. But I saw her. Mummy was in the car and then..." He couldn't finish. His little body shook with fear. Joan held him tighter, gently rubbing his back. "Shoo. It's okay, Minjun. I've got you." She sat on his bed, humming softly, an old lullaby from her village in Kenya, a tune her own mother used to sing whenever thunder scared her as a child. Slowly, his breathing calmed. His tiny hand gripped her sleeve as he drifted back to sleep on her lap. Joan smiled through a tear. "Poor boy," she whispered. "You're too young to carry such pain." But just as she leaned down to adjust his blanket, she heard a deep, cold voice behind her. "What are you doing in my son's room?" Her blood ran cold. Han Junisio stood at the door, dressed in black, his hair slightly wet from the rain. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp, like a blade in moonlight. Joan stood immediately. He was crying. He had a nightmare. "I told the staff not to disturb him at night. He was terrified," she shot back, her voice trembling but firm. "He needed comfort, not silence." There was a dangerous pause. The sound of rain filled the gap between them. "Leave," he said quietly, his tone low but heavy. "Now." Joan's lips parted to argue again, but she saw the flicker in his eyes. Something dark, something pained. So she lowered her gaze, gently tucked Minjun in, and walked out. In the hallway, she stopped, tears stinging her eyes. He could face gunfire, command men with one word, make enemies tremble. Yet he couldn't face his son's nightmares. She didn't understand him, but a part of her pitied him. Later that night, as she lay awake, she heard footsteps stop at her door. She didn't move. Then a quiet knock. Joan rose slowly, opened it slightly, and froze again. Han Junisio stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes softer now. He didn't look like the Mafia boss everyone feared. He looked like a man carrying too many ghosts. "I overreacted," he said flatly. He dreams about the accident sometimes. I don't know how to stop it." Joan's anger melted. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the sleeplessness, the guilt. "You can't stop dreams," she said gently, "but you can hold him when they come." He looked away, jaw tight. "He doesn't need pity." "No," she replied softly. "He needs love. And you need to stop punishing yourself." That struck him. He blinked, visibly taken aback by her boldness. No one talked to him like that. Not his men, not his rivals, not even his family. "Go to sleep," he said finally, voice softer than before. "Tomorrow we'll be busy." He turned to leave but paused halfway down the hall. "Thank you for calming him." Joan watched him walk away, wondering what kind of pain made a man so powerful yet so fragile. The next morning, the house felt different. Minjun ran to her at breakfast, laughing again, his eyes brighter than usual. "Joan, Appa said I can go to the park today if I finish my food." Joan smiled, ruffling his hair. "Then eat up, soldier." Han Junisio sat across the table, silent as usual, reading his tablet. But when Minjun accidentally spilled a bit of milk, Joan expected him to explode. He didn't. Instead, he just sighed quietly and handed the boy a napkin. It was a small change, but it made Joan's heart warm. Maybe, just maybe, that night had softened something inside him. Later that day, as they drove to one of his meetings, Junaseo sat in the back seat, phone in hand. He was speaking in Korean, but his tone was deadly calm, the kind that made her spine chill. When he hung up, he leaned forward. Joan, from now on, if anyone approaches the car, you do not open the window, no matter what they say. Okay, she said slowly. Is there a problem? He looked out the window. Enemies, always, but you don't need to worry. I'll protect you and the boy. The words hung in the air. Protect you. For the first time, his voice didn't sound like an order. It sounded like a promise. That night, after she tucked Minjun in, Joan sat by her window watching the rain again. Somewhere deep inside, she realized something was changing. Not just in the house, but in her heart. She had broken his rule. But maybe that was exactly what this house needed. Someone unafraid to break silence with kindness. And though she didn't know it yet, that one act, walking into the boys' room, had set off a chain of events that would soon change everything. Love, danger, and truth were all heading her way, and this time no rule could stop it. The morning sun in Seoul rose behind a thin curtain of fog, painting the city in pale gold. The air was crisp, the streets wet from the night rain. Joan had already washed the car and checked every corner of the black limousine. She'd been in Korea long enough to know that Han Junaseo liked perfection. Clean glass, full tank, not a fingerprint on the steering wheel. But that day, she noticed something different in him. When he stepped out of the mansion with Minjun beside him, there was no trace of his usual cold stare. Instead, there was quiet fatigue and maybe, just maybe, the faintest hint of trust. Good morning, she greeted. He nodded. We'll stop by Gangnam first. Then I have a meeting near the docks. After that, take Minjun to his piano lesson. Yes, sir. Minjun climbed in, his backpack bouncing against his small shoulders. Joan, can I sit in front today? Before Joan could answer, Han Junaseo spoke. No, the front seat is not safe. But Appa, it's okay, sweetheart, Joan said softly. You can sit behind me. That way I can still see you. The boy smiled, satisfied. Junaseo glanced at her in the mirror. A brief look that said more than words. She handled his son with a warmth he couldn't imitate. They drove through the heart of the city. Neon signs flickered to life as the clouds thickened again, and traffic crawled like a lazy snake. Minjun hummed softly to himself. Joan kept her focus, hands steady on the wheel. Junaseo scrolled through messages on his phone, his jaw tight. Everything seemed normal, until they turned onto a narrow street near the docks. A black van suddenly swerved in front of them. Joan hit the brakes hard. Tires screeched. What the? Before she could finish, another car blocked them from behind. Stay down, Junaseo barked, pulling Minjun onto the floor of the back seat. Joan's heart pounded. She saw men stepping out of the van. Black coats, masks, guns glinting under the gray light. Appa, Minjun cried. Quiet. Junaseo drew a gun from his jacket, eyes sharp, movements calm and precise, the way only men who've danced with death could move. Joan, he said firmly. When I open the door, reverse. Don't look back. Just drive. Her hands trembled. What about you? Just do it. But she didn't. She refused to leave him and the child. The first bullet hit the windshield, cracking the glass like a spider's web. Minjun screamed. Joan ducked. Appa. Without thinking, she threw herself over the little boy, shielding him with her body. Shards of glass rained down, cutting her arm. Junaseo fired back through the side window, one shot, clean and deadly. One of the attackers dropped. Another bullet whizzed past, missing his shoulder by inches. Joan, go, he shouted. But she gritted her teeth, slammed the car into reverse, and hit the accelerator. The engine roared, sending the back car crashing aside. Hold on, she yelled. The tires spun through puddles as she maneuvered sharply down the side street. Junaseo leaned out the window, firing 2 more shots at the van. By the time they reached the highway, only silence followed. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Minjun clung to her arm, crying quietly. Junaseo's voice broke the silence. Stop the car. She slowed down, pulling into an empty gas station. Her breath shook as she parked, then turned to look at him. What was that? He holstered his gun and rubbed his face. Someone trying to remind me that I still have enemies. Enemies who shoot at your child? She snapped. What kind of life is this? He looked at her then, really looked. Her sleeve was torn, blood dripping from a small cut on her arm. Without a word, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a first aid kit. He tore open a bandage, leaned closer, and took her hand gently. His touch was unexpectedly soft. You're hurt, he murmured. It's nothing, she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. It's something, he said quietly. You shielded my son. I won't forget that. Their eyes met. Silence, heavy and electric, filled the space between them. Then Minjun's small voice broke the moment. Appa. Were those bad men? Junesio exhaled slowly. Yes, but they won't hurt us again. The boy nodded and reached for Joan's hand. You're brave, Mummy Joan. Her heart melted. I just did what any mummy would do. Junesio's gaze softened at the word mummy. They decided to drive to one of his safe houses outside the city, a secluded villa by the hills, guarded and quiet. When they arrived, the guards saluted. Joan noticed how everyone bowed lower to him, out of fear, not respect. He carried Minjun inside, the boy already asleep on his shoulder. Joan followed, exhausted but alert. Inside, the villa was warm, smaller than the mansion but more lived in. Family photos lined one wall. Junesio, his late wife, and a tiny baby boy smiling between them. Joan's chest tightened. The woman in the photo had kind eyes. Soft, graceful. Everything Joan imagined his world had lost. She turned to find him watching her. She died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Car accident. Minjun was in the back seat. He saw everything. Her throat ached. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Since that day, I stopped believing in softness. The world doesn't reward it. But your son needs it, she said, her voice steady. He's not your soldier, Junesio. He's a child. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. But instead, he just sighed. You risked your life for him. Maybe that's why he clings to you. Joan smiled faintly. Children know who loves them. Their eyes lingered again. Longer this time, heavy with something neither of them wanted to name. Later that night, after Minjun was safely asleep in the next room, Joan stood by the balcony. The city lights sparkled far below, the air heavy with the scent of rain. She heard footsteps behind her. I can't promise you safety, he said quietly. Working for me comes with danger. I'm not afraid of danger, she replied without turning. I'm afraid of watching a child grow up without love. He walked closer, his voice softer now. You're different, Joan. No one has ever spoken to me this way. She smiled sadly. Maybe that's the problem. You're surrounded by people who fear you, not care for you. He said nothing, but she felt his gaze on her. Steady, unreadable, yet warmer than before. Then, in a tone almost like a whisper, he said, Thank you for saving my son. Joan turned, met his eyes, and replied quietly, You're welcome. But I didn't just save your son, Junesio. I saved your heart too, even if you don't know it yet. The night grew still. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of sirens far away, reminders that danger was still out there, waiting. But inside that quiet villa, for the first time in years, Han Junesio slept peacefully, knowing his son was safe, and that a woman with laughter in her soul had somehow stepped into their broken lives and brought light again. And for Joan, that night marked the beginning of something she couldn't explain, a pull she couldn't fight, a love she didn't plan, and a storm that was only just beginning.
Hello besties, Danger and Love have only just begun. Episode 2 awaits. Kindly like, subscribe and share.